When it was our turn, we didn't make a speech. Pam simply handed the judge and Karen a copy of our binder. Your Honor, Pam said. Everything you need to know is in there. It's all documented, dated, and verified. The judge spent the next 15 minutes silently flipping through the binder. We could see her expression change as she went from page to page. She looked at the photos of the signs. She read the receipts for the gravel. She studied the spreadsheet of crop losses. She looked at the quote for the irrigation repair. She read the soil test results that showed significant petroleum contamination. Then she paused for a long time on the official report from Karen's own insurance adjuster. The one that used the words intentional off-road trespass? She closed the binder and looked at Karen over the top of her glasses. Tillman, she said, her voice dripping with disapproval. You have presented me with a story. Mr. and Mrs. Jordan have presented me with a mountain of evidence. You claim you were entrapped? They have provided video evidence of you repeatedly and knowingly trespassing on their property for weeks. Even after clear warnings and a provided alternative path, you claim their land was unsafe. They have provided an expert soil analysis, showing that the only unsafe thing in that field is the contaminants left by the tow truck you hired. The judge wasn't finished. You drove a $60,000 luxury vehicle into a mud field and got stuck. That is not an entrapment. That is a foolish decision. The subsequent damage was a direct result of that initial illegal act of trespass. I find in favor of the plaintiffs. She banged her gavel so hard it made me jump. Judgment for the Jordans in the full amount of $7,243.51. You have 30 days to pay. Next case. It was over in less than 30 minutes. Karen just stood there, her mouth hanging open in complete shock. We walked out of the courtroom and didn't look back. We had one. We had followed the rules, built our case, and let the facts speak for themselves. The system, as slow and frustrating as it can be, had worked. About 3 weeks later, a check arrived in the mail. It was a cashier's check from Karen's bank for the full amount. Holding it in my hand felt better than any apology ever could. It was the color of justice. And it was going to buy a lot of new seed and a brand new irrigation pipe. And best of all, it was going to pay for a gate. A really, really nice one. In the weeks after court, the neighborhood got real quiet. Karen's check cleared, and I called the fencing crew. No more half measures. We ordered a heavy-duty 16-foot powder-coated swing gate and set a proper cattle guard in front. Thick steel rails over a concrete trench. Drive-through, around, over not anymore. The county signed off. It's a swing gate that opens for responders and a cattle guard that stops cars. Even when it's open, the day they set the last post, Pam and I watched the crew torque the hinges. The gate swung once and shut with a clean metallic thud. It looked like it had always been there. It said, clear as print, this is a boundary. This is a working farm. Respect it. Word about Karen moved through whispering pines like wind through dry grass. After the projector night and the gavel drop, her title meant nothing. The board held an emergency vote. The meeting chair read the result. Karen was out. Ed told me she didn't show. A for sale sign sprouted in her yard soon after. The pink Range Rover vanished, replaced by a modest sedan. Before summer was over, the house emptied. We never saw her again. I spent the settlement on fixing what mattered. A crew replaced the crushed run of irrigation and poured a protective collar around the new riser. I deep-tilled the ruts and hauled off the contaminated soil. Fresh topsoil went in. That patch looked like a healed scar. A brown seam in a green field, but it was healing. One warm Saturday, Pam and I took a small bag of seed corn and finished the job ourselves. We walked the line, bent, dropped, covered. Simple work, quiet work. Not just planting, reclaiming. We'd been pushed. We'd asked, posted, paved, and proved. We'd learned where to far lies. When hands push you in your own mud, when someone laughs at your boundary and dares you to hold it, what answered her wasn't anger. It was order. Photos, rows, soil tests, the law. A gate that opens when it should and says no when it must. Petty, maybe precise. Absolutely. By evening, the field was still. The new gate stood guard. The fresh soil waited on sun. I felt the balance settle back where it belongs. The corn would stand again. Seasons would do what seasons do. Pam slid her hand into mine, the quiet architect of the win. And we took one long look at the line we kept. We didn't start this fight. We finished it. A good fence doesn't just keep trouble out. It lets you rest inside. And the last word doesn't belong to the loudest voice, the fanciest car, or the biggest bully. That opened the floodgates. Another woman stood up and talked about getting a violation notice for having a garden gnome that was 2 inches too tall. A man complained about Karen trying to get his family's dog declared a nuisance because it barked when she drove by. Story after story came out, a wave of resentment and frustration that had been simmering under the surface for months. They weren't just angry about what she did to me. They were angry about what she had done to all of them. She had been a petty tyrant, and now her own subjects were in open revolt. Karen just sat there, her face crumbling. She tried to bang the gavel, but her hand was shaking too much. The other board members were looking at her, not with support, but with horror. Realizing they were tied to a sinking ship, Arthur, the meeting chair, finally stood up. In light of this new information, he stammered, I think it's clear we need to reconsider some things. The room erupted in applause. Karen Tillman had walked into that meeting expecting to be crowned a hero. Instead, she was watching her little kingdom burn to the ground. And Pam had just lit the match. It was a full-blown mutiny. And it was beautiful. The HOA meeting was a public humiliation for Karen. But it didn't pay to fix my irrigation pipe. The real victory, the one that mattered to my bank account, came in 2 parts: insurance and the courts. A few days after the HOA meltdown, we got a call from Karen's insurance company. An adjuster named Frank wanted to come out and inspect the damage to her vehicle. We were happy to oblige. Frank was a no-nonsense guy in his 50s, with a clipboard and a weary expression that suggested he'd seen it all. I walked him through the whole story just as Pam had at the meeting. We stood by the edge of the field, looking at the ruts in the damaged area. I showed him the signs. I pointed out the gravel lane. She had a clear, safe path right there, I explained. She chose to drive into a field that had just been soaked with 4 inches of rain. That's not an accident. That's a choice. Frank nodded slowly, taking notes and pictures. He walked over to the spot where the Range Rover had been stuck and poked at the still soft ground with the toe of his boot. Then came the masterstroke. Pam brought out her laptop. We sat on the tailgate of my pickup truck, and she played him the highlight reel. Karen laughing at the sign. Karen ignoring the gravel lane. Frank watched the videos without a word, his face impassive. When they were finished, he just sighed and closed his notebook. Well, he said, that makes my job a lot easier. He explained that a standard auto policy covers accidents and unforeseen events. It does not, he clarified. Cover damage that occurs as a direct result of the driver committing an illegal act. Driving past for no trespassing signs to take a shortcut through a muddy field, he said with a wry smile, is what we in the business call intentional off-road trespass. We're denying her vehicle damage claim for trespass. Any third-party claim is between you and Miss Tillman. That's not bad luck. That's a bill. I could have kissed him. Her own insurance company was calling her a trespasser. It was a huge victory. It meant we wouldn't have to fight some big corporation with deep pockets. We would just be dealing with Karen herself. He gave us his card and a copy of his official report, which detailed his findings. It was another brick for our wall of evidence. Next up was small claims court. We filed a suit against Karen Tillman and Bubba's 24, recovery for the full cost of the damages. The lost crops. The irrigation repair, the soil testing, and the cost of the deep tilling required to fix the soil compaction. The total came to just over $7,000. Karen, predictably, chose to represent herself. She probably thought her sharp tongue and HOA president experience would be enough to outsmart a simple farmer. She was wrong. The courtroom was small and informal. The judge was a stern-looking woman who did not seem to have much patience for nonsense. Karen went first, telling the same sob story she'd tried at the HOA meeting. She called me a menace and claimed I had entrapped her. She walked calmly to the front of the room, holding her laptop. "We do," she said, her voice clear and strong, filling the room. "But we thought it would be better to show you rather than just tell you." She didn't ask for permission. She just unplugged the lamp on a side table and plugged in a small projector. In seconds, an image flashed up on the blank wall behind the board members. It was a crystal-clear satellite photo of our two properties, with the property line drawn in a bright red. A murmur went through the crowd. Pam then began her presentation. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't use emotional language. She was like a college professor giving a lecture. This, she began, is the legal boundary. Everything on this side is the Jordan family farm. She then clicked to the next slide. A photo of our big no trespassing sign. We installed 4 of these signs after Ms. Tillman began using our field as her personal shortcut. Click. A video played. It was the clip from the trail cam of Karen's pink Range Rover slowing, her looking directly at the sign and then laughing as she drove around it and onto the field. The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Pam kept going, relentless. Click. A photo of the brand new gravel lane. To be neighborly, we then invested our own money to build a clear, safe and legal access path for our farm equipment, which also served as an obvious boundary. Click. Video of Karen's car the very next day. Deliberately swerving off the gravel and back onto the corn, the murmuring in the room started to grow louder. People were shifting in their seats, looking at Karen, whose confident smirk had completely vanished. Her face was ashen. Pam then showed them the photos of the tow truck, the deep ruts, the destroyed crops, the broken irrigation pipe gushing water. She put up the spreadsheet, showing the thousands of dollars in damages. Finally, she played the video from the night of the incident, showing Karen getting stuck and the tow truck arriving and immediately driving onto the field against my direct instructions. The assault charge against the driver, Pam concluded, her voice ringing with authority, was filed by the sheriff's department after he admitted to initiating physical contact. The criminal trespass citation against Ms. Tillman was also issued by the sheriff. We did not press charges. The state did. She turned off the projector. The room was buzzing. Karen was trying to say something, stammering about edited videos and twisted facts. But no one was listening to her. Then a man in the back stood up. It was my neighbor Ed, a quiet guy I'd waved to a few times. "I have a question for the board," he said, his voice shaking a little. "Last month, Karen Tillman fined me $200 because I left my recycling bin at the curb for 3 hours too long. She said rules were rules, so I have to ask, what's the fine for criminal trespass and causing thousands of dollars in property damage? Are there 2 sets of rules here? One for us and one for the HOA president?" Holding that binder, I no longer felt like a victim. I felt like a prosecutor. We had turned our anger and frustration into cold, hard data. That binder sat on our kitchen table like a loaded weapon. Every time I looked at it, I felt more confident. Karen and her pet gorilla of a tow truck driver had brought chaos and destruction to my land. But in response, we had brought order and evidence. They had acted on emotion and entitlement. We were acting on logic and the law. Pam had even printed out the state statutes on criminal trespass and property damage and highlighted the relevant sections. We were ready for whatever came next, whether it was an insurance claim, a lawsuit, or a showdown at the HOA. Looking at that binder, I knew one thing for sure. Karen Tillman had picked a fight with the wrong farmer, and she had definitely picked a fight with the wrong farmer's wife. Our evidence was ready. The only question was where we would get to use it first. The first real test of our binder of evidence came about a week later. We received a certified letter. It was an official notice of a special meeting of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. The agenda item was listed as discussion of recent incident involving resident Karen Tillman and adjacent property owner. Underneath, In smaller print, it said, "Complaint filed by Ms. Tillman regarding unsafe conditions and hostile behavior." Unsafe conditions. Hostile behavior. She's trying to flip the script to paint herself as the victim. She's got some nerve. "I'll give her that," I said to Pam. Pam just smiled and tapped the thick binder on the table. "Good," she said. "It's time for the neighbors to see who they elected." The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile room with beige walls and uncomfortable folding chairs. It was packed. Clearly, word had gotten around. Karen was sitting at the head table with the other two board members, looking prim and professional, as if she hadn't been screaming on the side of a muddy road just a week ago. She had a stack of papers in front of her and a look of supreme confidence. She thought this was her home turf, her kingdom, where her word was law. The meeting started, and after some boring procedural stuff, Karen stood up to speak. She launched into a dramatic, tearful performance. She spoke of her fear for the community's safety. She described me as an unstable, angry farmer who had created a dangerous trap on my property. She claimed I had lured her into the mud and then viciously assaulted the poor tow truck driver who had come to her rescue. She painted a picture of herself as a concerned citizen who had been terrorized. A few of her friends in the front row nodded along sympathetically. I just sat there, my arms crossed, and let her talk. I could feel the eyes of the other residents on me, a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. When she finally finished her tirade, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue, the meeting chair, a nervous-looking man named Arthur, cleared his throat. "Well, thank you, Karen. That was very compelling. Mr. Jordan, do you have a response?" All eyes turned to me. I didn't stand up. Pam did. As the deputies put Bubba in the back of the cruiser, I realized this whole messy, muddy night had changed everything. It was no longer just a dispute. It was a crime scene. And thanks to Pam, we had all the evidence we would ever need. The morning after the fight was quiet and still. The flashing lights were gone, Bubba was gone, and Karen's pink Range Rover was still there. A monument to bad decisions, sunk in the mud. Another more reputable tow company eventually came and winched it out carefully, staying on the gravel lane as instructed, but the damage was done. My field was a disaster zone. Deep, cavernous ruts scarred the earth where Bubba's truck had been. The irrigation riser was snapped clean off the ground around it, a swampy mess, and dozens of rows of my corn, my livelihood, were crushed and churned into the mud. I felt a wave of despair wash over me as I surveyed the wreckage. It felt personal. It felt like a violation. But Pam, my rock, was already in business mode. Asterisk, don't just stand there feeling sorry for yourself. "Hank," she said, handing me a clipboard and a tape measure. "Let's document. Let's make a case so solid that a blind judge could see it." She was right. This was the time for methodical, painstaking work. This was where we would win, not with fists, but with facts. We spent the entire day gathering evidence. It was like we were forensic investigators building a case for a trial. First, we measured and photographed everything. Pam took hundreds of pictures from every conceivable angle with her good digital camera. We had close-ups of the tire tracks showing the make and model of the tires. We had wide shots showing how the tracks deliberately veered off the gravel lane. We had detailed photos of the broken irrigation pipe, the snapped PVC looking like a shattered bone. We even took pictures of the lost, mud-caked sneaker Karen had left behind. Next, we quantified the damage. I took the tape measure and meticulously calculated the square footage of the destroyed crop area. We walked every single row, counting the number of stalks that were flattened or uprooted. I knew my average yield per acre, the current market price for corn, and the cost of the seed and fertilizer for that section. We put it all into a spreadsheet. The numbers were staggering. It wasn't just a few plants. It was thousands of dollars in lost revenue. We got a written quote from my irrigation supplier for the cost of repairing the main line. It was another four-figure number. While I was doing the physical work, Pam was on the computer organizing the digital evidence. She downloaded all the footage from the trail cam, not just from the night of the incident, but from the previous weeks as well. She created a video timeline. It started with clips of the field before Karen ever drove on it. Green, pristine, and undamaged. Then clip after clip of the pink Range Rover cutting across, day after day. She even found the perfect one. A clear shot of Karen driving right past one of my big no trespassing signs, looking at it and laughing. It was the smoking gun. She compiled all the phone records of our calls to the county planning office, with notes on who we spoke to and what was said about the easement. She had the receipt for the private property signs. She had the invoice for the tent. We just stood there, circling each other slowly. When the night was suddenly split apart by the sound of a siren and the flashing of red and blue lights, a sheriff's deputy's cruiser pulled up and a tall, calm-looking officer stepped out. He took one look at the scene, the half-sunk Range Rover, the tow truck mired in carving ruts, the two mud-caked men facing off, and the hysterical woman on the side of the road, and he just sighed. It was the sigh of a man who knew he was in for a long night of paperwork. "All right, folks, that's enough," he said, his voice carrying an authority that immediately cut through the tension. "Everyone, just stay right where you are." He came over to me first. "Sir, I'm going to need you to put the wrench down slowly." I looked at the wrench in my hand as if seeing it for the first time. I let it drop into the mud with a soft plop. The deputy, whose name tag read Miller, then turned to Bubba. "You stay by your truck." Then he walked over to Karen, who immediately launched into a hyped, frantic story about how I had attacked her poor, innocent tow truck driver for no reason. Deputy Miller listened patiently, nodding, but his eyes kept scanning the scene. Taking in the tire tracks, the broken irrigation pipe, and the pristine gravel lane just a few feet away, he came back over to me while another deputy who had just arrived started taking statements from Bubba and Karen. "All right, sir," Miller said, pulling out a notepad. "Why don't you tell me your side of it?" "Start from the beginning." So I did. I told him everything about the months of trespassing, the signs, the new gravel lane she had ignored, the way the tow truck driver had refused to use the lane and had driven straight onto my field, destroying my crops. I told him about the broken irrigation pipe. I told him how Bubba had shoved me to the ground first. While I was talking, Em came walking out from the house, holding her tablet. "Excuse me, deputy," she said, her voice calm and steady as a rock. "I believe I have something that might help clarify the situation." She showed him the tablet. On the screen was the crystal-clear time-stamped video from our trail cam. It showed everything. It showed Karen's car pulling up. It showed her deliberately choosing to ignore the gravel lane and drive into the mud. It even showed the beginning of my confrontation with Bubba. It didn't capture the shove, but it established the entire sequence of events leading up to it. Deputy Miller watched the video, his expression unreadable. He looked at the tire tracks in the mud, which perfectly matched the video. He looked at the broken pipe gushing water. He pointed at the gravel lane. "You had a path and ignored it, didn't you?" He looked at me covered in mud. Then he walked over to Bubba, who was loudly insisting he hadn't done anything wrong. "Sir," Miller said to him, "did you at any point put your hands on this man?" Bubba's face went pale under the grime. "He was in my face. He was threatening me." "It's not what I asked," Miller said, his voice flat. "Did you push him?" Bubba just stared at his boots. That was all the answer Miller needed. The deputy came back to me. "Sir," he said, "based on the evidence here, the video, the clear property damage, and the driver's own admission of initiating physical contact, I'm placing him under arrest for assault and criminal mischief." He then turned to Karen. "And ma'am, you will be receiving a citation for criminal trespass. I suggest you find another tower, a more professional one. And I strongly suggest you stay off Mr. Jordan's property from now on." The look on Karen's face was a priceless mixture of shock, fury, and utter disbelief. She had been so sure she was in charge, so sure she would win. And in the end, she was just a woman with a citation and a very expensive, very muddy lawn ornament. He took a step toward me, puffing out his chest. "Lady's paying me to get her car out. I'll drive wherever I need to. Now get out of my way before you get hurt." He put a big, greasy hand on my chest and shoved me. That's the moment the fence moved from my field to my jaw hard. I stumbled backward, my boots slipping in the slick mud, and I fell. I landed flat on my back in the cold, wet dirt. The sky spun above me. All I could see was his grinning face looking down at me and Karen standing by the road. A look of pure vindictive pleasure on her face, lying there covered in mud with my field torn to shreds, and my irrigation system broken. I felt a white-hot flash of anger unlike anything I had ever felt before. He had put his hands on me on my land. That was a mistake. I got up slowly, my mind suddenly very clear. All the frustration, all the legal maneuvering, all the patient planning, it all boiled away in that one moment. There was no more strategy. There was just this him and me, mud and steel. "You made a big mistake," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Pam was already on the porch. I knew, phone in hand, calling the sheriff. But the sheriff was 10 minutes away, and this was going to be over in the next 30 seconds. The tow truck's winch lights were on, casting a harsh theatrical glare over the whole muddy scene. It was him and me in the spotlight. He laughed again and took another step toward me. That was his second mistake. The fight was on, and I knew, win or lose, that nothing would ever be the same between Whispering Pines and my farm again. Getting shoved to the ground in your own mud is a special kind of insult. As I got to my feet, wiping the grit from my mouth, something inside me just snapped. I'm not a young man, and I'm certainly not a brawler, but I've spent 40 years hauling hay bales, wrestling with machinery, and turning stubborn soil. I'm tougher than I look. Bubba, the tow truck driver, clearly thought he was dealing with some frail old farmer he could just push around. He was still smirking as I came at him. I didn't throw a wild punch. I did what years of moving heavy objects has taught you to do. I used my momentum. I lowered my shoulder and drove straight into his soft midsection. It was like hitting a sack of wet cement. All the air went out of him with a loud oof. The smirk vanished from his face, replaced by a look of pure surprise. He stumbled backward, trying to catch his balance in the slick mud, his arms windmilling. It gave me the only opening I was going to get. I swung a right hook, not at his head, but at his body, right into his ribs. It connected with a solid, meaty thud. He grunted in pain and swung a big, clumsy fist at my head. I ducked under it, the punch sailing harmlessly over me. The mud was the great equalizer. His size and strength didn't mean much when he couldn't get any traction. We were like two hippos fighting in a bog. We grabbed onto each other, slipping and sliding, wrestling in the mud under the harsh glare of the winch lights. Karen was screaming something from the roadside. But it was all just noise. It was clumsy, it was ugly, and it was exhausting. He was strong, and he managed to get me in a headlock, trying to push my face down into the mud. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I panicked, in my hand searching for purchase. Found the handle of the big pipe wrench I always keep tucked in my belt when I'm checking irrigation lines. It's for fittings, not fights. So I jabbed, didn't swing. He howled in pain, and his grip loosened just enough for me to twist free. We separated, breathing heavily, both of us covered from head to toe in black mud. We looked like swamp monsters. He was looking at the wrench in my hand now, his eyes wide. The fight had gone out of him. He had wanted to be a bully, but he wasn't prepared for someone to fight back this hard. We saw her get out of the car again, this time more carefully, and wade her way back to the pavement. One of her expensive shoes lost forever to the mud. She stood there on the road, looking back at her half-swallowed vehicle, a picture of pure, unadulterated fury. She was yelling into her phone, pointing and gesturing at my field. "Looks like she's calling in reinforcements," Pam noted. I nodded. Well, this should be interesting. I had a feeling her choice of rescue service would be just as classy and well thought out as her choice of shortcut. I pulled my boots back on. The show was far from over. A new character was about to enter the stage. I had a feeling he wasn't going to be any more respectful of my property than Karen was. The sight of her pink SUV sinking slowly in my field was a victory. But the sound of a heavy diesel engine rumbling down the road told me the next chapter of the battle was about to begin. The tow truck that rolled up was not from a reputable, well-known company. It was a rusty, mud-caked beast of a machine that looked like it had been cobbled together from the parts of 3 other trucks that had lost a fight with a mountain. The name on the door was painted in sloppy, dripping letters, Bubba's 24-hour recovery. A big, burly man with a greasy beard and a shirt that was 2 sizes too small climbed out of the cab. He didn't look at me or my house. He just looked at the stranded Range Rover and then at Karen, was pointing frantically. I walked out to the edge of my gravel lane, staying on my property. "Afternoon," I said, my voice calm and even. "Looks like you've got a bit of a situation here." The driver, who I assumed was Bubba himself, gave me a sideways glance. "No kidding, genius," he grunted. "Got a call about a rich lady stuck in the mud?" Karen, seeing me, marched over. "You," she shrieked, her face red and splotchy. "This is your fault. You did this deliberately." Just raised my eyebrows. "Ma'am, I can't control the rain. Your vehicle is on my private property. I'd ask you to have it removed with as little further damage as possible." I then turned to Bubba. "Listen," I said, pointing to the gravel lane. "You can back your truck down this lane here. It's compacted base set for 20,000 pounds. Stay on it. It's solid. You should be able to get a good angle to pull her out without tearing up any more of my field." Bubba looked at my lane, then at the direct path across the corn, and then back at me. He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You think I'm driving this rig down that little garden path? I'm going straight in." Easy as shot. I stood my ground. "This is my land," I said, my voice getting firmer. "You will use the access lane I provided, or you will not come onto my property at all." He ignored me completely. He walked right past me, his boots squelching in the soft ground, and started unspooling a heavy winch cable. Karen gave me a smug, triumphant look. She had found someone who cared about rules even less than she did. Bubba got back in his truck, turned the wheel, and drove it right off the pavement and onto my field. The heavy truck, much heavier than the Range Rover, immediately sank about a foot. The tires spun, ripping huge, gaping trenches in the soil. He was destroying everything. Rows of corn were being churned into green and brown sludge under his wheels. "Stop," I yelled, running toward the truck. "You're destroying my crop." But he just kept going, rocking the truck back and forth, digging the ruts deeper and deeper. Then I heard it, a loud, sickening crunch followed by the sound of gushing water. My heart leaped into my throat. He had driven right over one of my main irrigation risers, a 6-in PVC pipe buried just under the surface. Water started bubbling up from the ground, turning the already muddy field into a lake. He had not only trespassed and destroyed my crops, but now he had wrecked my irrigation system, a repair that would cost thousands of dollars and weeks of work to fix. That was it. The line had been crossed. This was no longer about a shortcut. This was wanton destruction. I ran up to the driver's side door and banged on it with my fist. "Get out of the truck!" I roared. "Get off my land now." Bubba killed the engine and climbed out slowly, a nasty smirk on his face. He was at least 6 and taller than me and outweighed me by a good 100 pounds. "You got a problem, old man?" He sneered. "My problem," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking with rage, "is that you are on my property, destroying my livelihood after I specifically told you not to." To complete the masterpiece, I did one last thing. I used the tractor's front-end loader to place a few large rocks and a small log on the edges of my gravel lane, right where it met the road. It wasn't a blockade. There was still a clear ATFT path between them, but it made the entrance to the proper path look a little tighter, a little more inconvenient. It was a psychological nudge for a person in a hurry, a person who already felt entitled to the whole field. The wide-open, muddy-looking shortcut would seem much more inviting than the slightly narrowed official path. I was baiting the trap with her own impatience. Finally, soaked to the bone, but filled with a profound sense of satisfaction, I drove the tractor back to the barn. I killed the engine, and the only sound was the steady drumming of the rain. I stood there for a moment in the darkness, looking out at my handiwork. It was invisible. It was perfect. Pam was waiting for me at the door with a dry towel. "How did it go?" she asked. I just smiled, a slow, wicked grin. "Let's just say I've improved the field's water retention properties," I said. "Now all we have to do is wait." I went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I lay there listening to the rain, imagining the water seeping deeper and deeper into the soil, turning that black dirt into a thick, greedy paste. I was thinking about the core of it all. How far is too far? I'd put up signs. I'd built a road. I'd followed the rules. She had laughed at all of it. This felt different. This wasn't a sign she could ignore. This was physics. This was consequence. It wasn't me stopping her. It was the earth itself, as the rain finally started to let up around 3 o'clock in the morning. I felt a strange sense of peace. I had done everything I could do. The trap was set. It was a perfectly legal, naturally occurring, beautifully engineered mud pit, and it had a pink Range Rover's name written all over it. The only question left was when she would come to claim her prize. The next day was a Tuesday. The world outside was washed clean. The sky, a brilliant, cloudless blue. The air was fresh, and the ground was completely saturated. Puddles stood everywhere. My field, especially in that one particular spot, looked like a shallow, muddy pond. It was glorious. Pam set up one of our trail cameras on a fence post aimed perfectly at the entrance to the field. We weren't going to just hear about it. We were going to have front row seats. We linked the camera's feed to her laptop on the kitchen table. It was better than television. We didn't have to wait long. Just after 4 o'clock, right on schedule, the pink monstrosity appeared at the end of the road. My heart started to beat a little faster. It was one thing to plan it, another to see it unfold. Pam leaned forward, her eyes glued to the screen. "Here she comes," she whispered. The Range Rover slowed as it approached. I could see the driver, Karen, peering through her windshield. She looked at the slightly narrowed entrance to my gravel lane with its carefully placed rocks. Then she looked at the wide, open, muddy path through the field. It was exactly as I had predicted. Her impatience and arrogance made the decision for her. Why squeeze through a proper path when you can just plow through an open field? She turned the wheel, the front tires. Expensive all-terrain models that had probably never touched anything rougher than a speed bump. Left the pavement and hit the mud. For a glorious second, nothing happened. The vehicle's momentum carried it forward about 10 feet. I almost thought I had miscalculated. But then the forward motion stopped. It just ceased. The back tires, now in the soup, spun uselessly, sending arcs of black mud flying 20 feet in the air, splattering the side of her ridiculously pink car. She tried to reverse. The wheels whined, digging themselves in deeper. She tried to go forward again. The big V8 engine roared, but the Range Rover just settled, its frame sinking with a soft, final sigh into the muck. It was beautiful, perfect. 4 wheels. No exit. The driver's side door opened, and Karen Tillman stepped out. Or rather, she tried to step out. Her left foot, clad in some kind of fancy white sneaker, plunged straight into the mud up to her ankle. She let out a shriek that we could almost hear from the house. She flailed for a second, trying to pull her foot out, which only made her sink deeper. Finally, she managed to haul herself back into the car. Slamming the door shut, we watched on the laptop as she furiously started making... I stopped pacing. "What are you getting at?" He also mentioned, she continued, a small smile playing on her lips, that we are fully within our rights to maintain our property. That includes things like drainage, irrigation, and soil management. As long as a vehicle could theoretically pass, we're in the clear. The easement guarantees access, not a smooth, pleasant ride. A new idea began to form in my mind, pushing out the anger and frustration. It was a seed of an idea, a little bit of petty, malicious compliance. If I couldn't build a wall, maybe I could build something else. Something natural, something perfectly legal. "The weather report says we're getting a big storm tomorrow night," Pam said, looking out the window as if on cue. 3 to 4 inches of rain, they're predicting. We looked at each other, and for the first time all day, I felt a genuine smile spread across my face. The law said I couldn't put up a gate. The law said I couldn't block the path. But the law said absolutely nothing about the mud. The law didn't say I had to make it easy for her. The law didn't protect her from the consequences of her own bad decisions. The county wouldn't let me lock a gate, but they weren't going to tell me how to plow my own field. The hook wasn't a gate. It was geology. and I was about to become an expert in applied hydrology. A plan was forming. A beautiful, muddy, and entirely legal plan. The rain started just after dinner the next day. It wasn't a gentle spring shower. It was a gully washer, the kind of hard-driving rain that sounds like a million tiny hammers on the tin roof of the barn. The sky turned a dark, bruised purple, and the wind whipped the trees back and forth. Most people see a storm like this and decide to curl up on the couch with a good book. I saw it as an opportunity. Pam stood at the back door, a steaming mug of tea in her hands, gave me a look that was equal parts worry and excitement. "You sure about this, Hank?" she asked. I just grinned, pulling on my heavy-duty rain gear and muddy work boots. "Pam," I said, zipping up my jacket, "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. It's time for a little land management." I fired up my old John Deere tractor. The engine roared to life, a familiar, comforting rumble against the drumming of the rain. The headlights cut two bright cones through the dark, wet night. I wasn't going out there to plow or plant. I was going out to do some landscaping. Creative drainage solutions, you might call it. I drove the tractor right to the spot where Karen always cut the corner, the place where her tires had worn a permanent scar into my field. The ground was already getting soft, the water pooling in the low spots. Perfect. I lowered the box blade on the back of the tractor. Now, it's important to understand what I did and what I didn't do. I didn't dig a hole. A hole would be an obstruction, a booby trap. That would be illegal. What I did was much more subtle. I used the blade to gently and legally reshape my own land. I scraped away the higher ground on either side of her chosen path and used that soil to build up the edges just a little bit. I was creating a swale, a shallow channel. It's a common farming technique to control erosion and direct water flow. If any county inspector came out to look, they would see nothing more than responsible agricultural practice. But I knew what I was really doing. I was shaping a drainage, a shallow swale that sends water where I want it. All that rain hammering down on the field was now being channeled directly into that 10 ft wide strip of land. I wasn't just letting it get muddy. I was actively encouraging it to become a swamp. I worked for over an hour in the driving rain, the tractor lights sweeping back and forth. I'd make a pass, check my work, then make another. I was like a sculptor, but my medium was dirt and water. With each pass, the ground got softer, spongier. The water pooled deeper. By the time I was done, you could barely see the difference in the dark. It just looked like a wet patch in a wet field. But I knew that underneath that shallow layer of water was a deep, thick, tire-sucking soup of black mud. Pam spent a good 40 minutes on that call. I could hear bits and pieces of the conversation. Words like easement, right-of-way, and agricultural crossing. None of them sounded good. When she finally hung up, she had a grim look on her face. I asked, "Can I build the gate or not?" She shook her head slowly. "It's complicated." The man I spoke to, a guy named Dave, was actually pretty helpful. He pulled up the original plat maps for our property and the Whispering Pines development. She spun her laptop around to show me the screen. It was a mess of lines and numbers, but she pointed to a faint dotted line that ran right where Karen was cutting through. "See this?" she said. "When the developers put in the subdivision, the county required them to maintain a 10 ft agricultural access easement. It's a relic from when all this land was farms. It's meant for emergency vehicles, or, in a very rare case, for another farmer to move equipment if their own access is blocked. It's almost never used, but it's on the books." My heart sank. "So, you're telling me she has a right to drive through my field?" I asked, my voice getting louder. No, Pam said quickly. "That's the important part. It's an easement for access, not a public road for shortcuts." David, the county, was very clear about that. Her using it for daily convenience is absolutely not what it's for. It's still trespassing. Then what's the problem with a gate? I grumbled. "The problem," she explained, "is that we can't unreasonably obstruct the easement. A permanent locked gate is considered an unreasonable obstruction. The county could fine us for it. If a fire truck ever needed to get through there and our gate was locked, we'd be in a world of trouble. Access must stay passable. Shortcuts are still trespass. That's the trap. Karen must have known about the easement as HOA president. She'd probably seen every plat map and zoning ordinance for the whole neighborhood. She wasn't just being a bully. She was being a smart, calculating one. She was exploiting a dusty old rule, knowing that it tied my hands. She could drive across my land, and if I put up a gate, I would be the one breaking the law. The injustice of it all sat in my gut like a lead weight. I felt trapped. We spent the rest of the day talking it through, going over the options. We could call the sheriff every time she did it. But that would be a nightmare if he said she said, and we'd have to catch her in the act every single time. We could sue her, but that would take months and cost a fortune in lawyer fees. I was getting more and more frustrated, pacing back and forth in the kitchen while Pam just sat there thinking. She has this way of getting very still when she's working on a problem. Like a heron watching a fish. I was ready to go dump a load of manure on her driveway and call it a day. But Pam, she's the strategist. She sees the whole board, not just the next move. Finally, she looked up at me, a tiny spark in her eye. The county man, Dave, said we can't unreasonably obstruct the easement, she said, repeating the phrase slowly. He didn't say we couldn't reasonably discourage it. She smiled, a thin, determined line. No, we don't use shotguns. We use paperwork and we use patience. We're going to build a fence, metaphorically speaking, one she can't just drive around. So we moved on to phase 2. Politeness had failed. Obvious legally backed signs had failed. Now it was time for inconvenient construction. I bought 10 tons of coarse gravel. It's the heavy stuff with sharp edges that you don't want to drive your $60,000 SUV on if you can help it. I used my tractor and a box blade to carve out a very clear, very deliberate lane right along my property line. It was about 8 feet wide, running from the service road all the way down to where my field met the HOA's precious pavement. It was a perfect, legal, and obvious path for my tractor to get from one place to another without touching their street. More importantly, it created a visual and physical barrier. On one side, a clean gravel road. On the other, my field of green corn. I was making the right choice, the easy choice. I even put up a new, smaller sign at the head of the lane. It was almost friendly. Farm vehicle crossing, it said. I was giving her an alternative, a way to save face. She could claim she thought this new lane was for everyone. I wouldn't have liked it, but I probably would have let it go just to be done with her. I finished the work, stood back, and looked at my handiwork. A clear gravel path, bright red signs, and a field of healthy corn. It was a picture of property lines and common sense. No one, not even the most entitled bubblegum car-driving HOA president in the world, could misunderstand this. It was an invitation to be a decent human being. I went to bed that night thinking, this has to be it. This has to be the thing that works. But as I drifted off to sleep, I could still hear that sharp barking laugh in my head. And a little voice told me that for people like Karen Tillman, an invitation to be decent is just another thing to ignore. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Pam making coffee. She was standing at the kitchen window, looking out over the field. She didn't have to say a word. I walked up behind her and looked. There, plain as day, were 2 fresh sets of tire tracks. They started at the road, veered right off the brand new gravel lane before it even got going, and carved a deep, muddy scar right through the heart of the corn. She hadn't just crossed the line. She had gone out of her way to defy me, to show me that my work, my time, my property meant absolutely nothing to her. She was a bully, plain and simple. And I was starting to realize that you can't reason with a bully. You can't ask them nicely to stop. You have to make them stop. The gravel lane hadn't been an invitation. It had been a challenge, and she had accepted. Looking at those tracks, I knew this was far from over. It was time to stop thinking about what a reasonable person would do and start thinking about what the law would allow me to do. After the gravel lane failed so spectacularly, my first thought was a gate. A big, heavy steel gate with a thick chain and a padlock the size of a dinner plate. It seemed like the obvious solution. If she can't drive through it, she can't get in. Simple, but Pam, my ever-practical, ever-thorough wife, put a stop to that idea before I even got the post-hole digger out of the barn.
Alda.
Hank, she said, holding up her hand while cradling the phone against her shoulder. I'm on the phone with the county planning office. Let's not do anything until we know exactly where we stand. I sighed, leaning against the doorframe. I'm a man of action. I like to fix problems with I recently faced my own worst nightmare. The local HOA leader kept cutting my field in her pink Range Rover after laughing at my no trespassing signs. And then she accused me of attacking her. Little did she know, I had petty revenge on my mind and turned the whole HOA against her. But let me start at the beginning before we dive in. Let us know where you're listening from today. I'm Hank Jordan. I farm dirt and protect it. Karen Tillman didn't walk on my land. She drove a pink Range Rover through it. I asked, nice. She laughed. So I let the field answer, it's good black dirt that holds water and grows corn so sweet you can eat it raw off the stalk. The problem isn't the dirt. The problem is the fancy new neighborhood that sprouted up next door like a crop of expensive mushrooms after a spring rain. They call it Whispering Pines, which is a funny name because the only things whispering are the neighbors. Talking about each other, my wife Pam and I keep to ourselves. We have a simple deal with the world. Don't mess with our rows, and we won't mess with yours. For a while, that deal held up just fine. Then Karen Tillman got elected president of their homeowners association. The first time I saw her do it, I thought it was a mistake. A pink Range Rover, the color of that bubble gum you get out of a machine, came tearing down the service road and then just hooked a right straight into my field. It bounced over about 20 rows of young corn, maybe a foot high at the time, and popped out on the other side, right onto the asphalt of her precious cul-de-sac. It saved her, maybe, 30 seconds of driving. I stood there on my porch, coffee mug in hand, and just watched. 30 seconds of her time in exchange for $100 worth of seed and future crop. I let it go. Maybe she was new. Maybe she was lost. Maybe her car was just magnetically drawn to ruining a man's livelihood. But then it became routine. Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4. The pink blur would cut the corner, leaving a little puff of dust and a trail of bent, broken stalks. That's when I knew it wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. She was treating my cornfield like her personal off-road playground. Pam, who sees everything from the kitchen window, just shook her head. That woman, she said, her voice tight, thinks the world is her doormat. I grunted in agreement. Well, I said more to myself than to her. She's about to find out some doormats are electrified. My first step was simple, neighborly. I'm not an unreasonable man. I believe in signs. I went to the hardware store and bought 4 big ones, bright red, with white letters. They said, private property, no trespassing, crop damage is a felony. I even added a little please on the bottom with a paint pen because my mama raised me right. I spent a whole Saturday digging post holes and setting them in concrete at the corners of the field, where she liked to cut across. They were big, they were clear, and they were legally binding. The county says that crossing must stay passable for emergencies. So signs first. I stood back, wiped the sweat off my brow, and felt pretty good about it. Problem solved, right? Wrong. The very next Tuesday, I was out on my tractor